Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Pete Lieb. I am super happy you're with me tonight. I am very, very excited about this episode. My guest tonight is my friend of the program, Mr. Ivor Davis, and we're going to discuss his new book tonight, Manson Exposed, a reporter's 50-year journey into madness and murder. Ivor is an author, journalist, and investigative reporter who was deeply embedded in the life of Charles Manson. For half a century, Davis was an eyewitness to the case. He was hot on the story from the moment the Tate murders were discovered in August of '69. And in the new book, Manson Exposed, a reporter's 50-year journey into madness and murder, he shares his personal odyssey during that time frame and pieces together different pieces, talks about the trial, and then gives some new light on the trial itself and this ever-changing story. Five to Die was actually his first book that he published on the murders in 1970 and was so pinpointed and detailed that it was actually used by the Los Angeles District Attorney as a blueprint for the prosecution. Mr. Davis spent more than half a century as a writer for The Express, The Times of London, and The New York Times. Over that period, he has covered major events in North America and has interviewed some of the biggest names in show business, as well as some of our greatest American tragedies. You can find more information about his book and all of his books at ivordavisbooks.com and amazon.com. He was also featured in the television program Helter Skelter, an American Myth, which is airing right now on Epix. I've watched the first couple of episodes of it. It is amazing. You can also find Ivor's previous visit to the Prove Me Wrong podcast, where we discuss the book The Beatles and Me on Tour on your favorite podcasting platform or on the Prove Me Wrong show page on anchor.fm. So he's been on the program before. We've had a great conversation about the Beatles, which was probably my favorite topic, period. So once again, welcome, Ivor, to the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So again, it's good to talk to you again. I'm really glad that you made the time to come back with me. I'm glad that you're well. I know that we are still going through the pandemic right now, the coronavirus. I know that we've all been kind of shut in. It's good to see you for sure. So I mentioned in your background, you're an investigative reporter. Previously, we've discussed a lot of the American history that you've covered over the years. How did you become personally involved in the Manson case when it happened?
Well, I was West Coast correspondent for the London Daily Express back in 1960s, and this, of course, was August 1969, August the 9th. And I got a call from London. All they said was, there's been some murders in a exclusive area of Beverly Hills. We don't know who the victims are. We know nothing. Get over there because this is going to be a big story. So I just raced over from my home, which was 15 minutes away. And when I got to this house on Cielo Drive, there were already dozens of television and radio and other reporters. They were outside because the police had sealed off the area. And so for 4 hours, we didn't know who lived there. I was very lucky because I happened by pure chance to have a friend called Philip Freed who played soccer with me in Los Angeles in those days. And I went to his house to use his phone because in those days, we did not have cell phones.
Right.
And so I said, Phil, who lives in that house? He said, Sharon Tate, her husband, Roman Polanski. Wow. So I went back. And of course, within 2 hours, the police identified who they were. And from that day on, I was fascinated by the case. When Manson was arrested, and I heard that he lived at the Spahn Movie Ranch, I raced out to the Spahn Movie Ranch and interviewed for 2 or 3 days members of the Manson family, the girls and some guys who were not involved in the murders. And the whole craziness of what took place unfolded before my very eyes as I listened, almost boggle-minded, to this story from these young men and women who told me who Manson was. And that was my introduction to this bizarre case.
So just take me real quick. I definitely want to get to your weekend at the Spahn Ranch. Can you take me quickly through, for people who may be listening who really don't know much about exactly what happened? It has been 50 years now. Can you take me through the murders themselves and kind of the timeline on what happened and how they were connected?
Yes. The murders that I went to that unfolded on Cielo Drive were, we discovered, the beautiful 8 months pregnant actress Sharon Tate, brutally murdered. Her friend and former boyfriend, the hairdresser to the stars, did McQueen, he did Paul Newman, he did everybody. His name was Jay Sebring. There was a friend of Roman Polanski, a Polish guy called Wojtek Frykowski. And Frykowski was a wannabe movie guy, and a Polish, same as Polanski, and they became buddies. And Polanski said, "You can stay at my house," and he did, with Abigail Folger, and she was the upper class San Francisco heiress to the Folger coffee fortune. 4 people were murdered. By chance, there was a young man living in the guest house who had a friend visiting him, and the friend's name was Stephen Parent. And as Stephen Parent was leaving the house, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, the killers came there, and Charles Tex Watson, who was one of the key murder suspects, shot the guy dead in his car. Terrible. So the case broke on that day, August the 9th. And then August the 10th, across town, 15 miles away, we discovered there was another murder. And it didn't seem to be linked. It was a grocery store couple. And I want to tell you, none of us put it together. But the difference between the one murder in Beverly Hills and the other murder in a nice, safe neighborhood was that the cops saw painted on the wall in the victim's blood things like helter skelter, pigs. And it seemed like there was a connection. But I want to tell you that the La Biancas who were murdered in the Los Feliz area 24 hours later had nothing to do with Sharon Tate. And nobody linked the two cases, even though there were similarities. And the main reason why that happened, Pete, it was because LAPD handled one case, LA sheriffs handled the other case, and never the police twain shall meet.
So these people were not targeted for any reason then, as far as you could tell, because you said they weren't connected. So it seems like, do you believe, or did they believe that both of these were just, we randomly selected a location and then killed whoever was in the home?
The feeling was that this was a copycat killing. This was the La Biancas, Rosemary and Lino La Bianca, were random people by somebody who'd seen read about the murders the day before and copycatted it. But we did not know until 4 months later that they were linked, and the same people who carried out the first murders at Sharon Tate's house were responsible for the second set of murders.
So you just answered my next question. So my next question was going to be, how long did it take to catch and to link these together? So it took 4 months for them to finally determine.
I'd like to explain why it took 4 months. Well, first of all, everybody thought it was a black magic, a voodoo, a drug deal gone wrong. Nobody really had a clue. The police didn't have a clue. For 4 months, they ran around interviewing people. Was it a drug thing? No. And then what happened by pure chance was that a young woman named Susan Atkins had been arrested for the murder of a musician in Topanga Canyon 10 days before the Sharon Tate murders. And she was in jail in downtown Los Angeles in the women's lockup. And all of a sudden, she started talking to her cell mates, and she said, "You know who killed Sharon Tate? I did." So the women, her cellmates, thought this woman is bragging, she's on drugs or whatever. But she gave them such meticulous detail about how she killed Sharon, who killed Sharon, what the circumstances were, that they were terrorized. They thought, oh my God, what do we have here? This little girl who looks like an innocent schoolgirl. So they went to the prison authorities. And first of all, believe it or not, the prison authorities said, no, it's nothing to it. But they were insistent. And finally, LAPD homicide detectives came to jail and interviewed Susan Atkins. And Susan Atkins spilled her guts. And in spilling her guts and giving chapter and verse of the killings, she implicated Manson and the members of his family, and that's how the cops broke the case.
Susan Atkins was an ally to them forever, right? She didn't actually ever really turn on them. What was the rationale, do you think, that caused her just to give all this information and essentially incriminate herself and all of her friends?
Well, I think she was boasting. She was trying to prove to her cellmates that she was a big fish.
Uh-huh.
She was not just a little teeny girl on a drug trip. And she just finally spilled her guts to them. And as I said, the cops went to see her, and she gave them such meticulous detail of who did what, how they got over the fence at Cielo Drive, how she was barefooted, who killed who said what to who, that they said this must be the case. But then what happened was Susan Atkins, was going to be the chief prosecutor, the star witness. And then Manson, who had been arrested by then, got to her, and she reneged. And she never testified. But fortunately for the prosecution, there was a young lady called Linda Kasabian, who was not involved in the actual killings, but drove the car to the Sharon Tate house. And she suddenly was arrested because she was a suspect, and she became the prosecution's star witness, and she detailed in the trial that lasted a year exactly what happened. And as a result of her testimony, they were able to convict, because Susan Atkins changed her mind and ended up as a defendant.
So there was a lot of misdirection and messaging baked into those crime scenes. Like you said, helter skelter and pigs. What do you think, or did they ever kind of figure out what was the point of all of that misdirection, all of that, the show and smearing things on the walls?
Well, don't forget, they came, as I said, the two problems were that even when the Los Angeles sheriff said to the LA homicide detectives, and they're two separate police units, you've got to understand, LA sheriff, LAPD, one is the county, one is the city. When one of the units said to the other homicide guys, there are similarities, one of I think it was LAPD, said, no, there isn't. And there was, of course. So the problem was that internal police rivalry or whatever. So they were baffled for almost 4 months until Susan Atkins blew the whistle on Charlie Manson.
So at that point, so Manson has been arrested, and the other suspects have been arrested, and then you say you went to Spahn Ranch yourself and met with the remaining family members that were still there. What was that like?
Well, let me tell you that. I'll just fill in a little gap here.
Sure.
Charles Manson was not arrested for the first time. He was arrested in October of 1969 for damaging California patrol vehicles. So he was for deliberately sabotaging an earth mover. So at the time of Charles Manson's arrest, he was sitting in a jail cell in Independence, California, waiting charges of car theft. I mean, it was ridiculous. So once the case broke, once the police chief, Ivor Davis, revealed the names of the suspects, the guys up in Independence said, hey, we've arrested him for this. This is small fry. Let's get him to LA. So they sent him back to LA, and that's when he started standing trial. I'm sorry, give me the question again, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. No, but that was the easiest manhunt of all time then, right? He's already here on the books. Hell, let's just transfer him down. But my question was, once you heard of that and you heard where they were located and they were at the Spahn Ranch, you say that you went there and you spent a weekend with the remaining family members and talked with them. What was that like?
Well, as soon as I heard that Manson lived at this decaying movie ranch, it was called the Spahn Movie Ranch, I thought, well, let's find out who this guy is. And as a reporter, I think any reporter would have done it, but I was fairly fast off the mark because I'd come back from Independence, where Manson was arraigned for car theft, and went straight to the Spahn Ranch. And when I got there, I expected to see hostility, but they were quite willing to talk. There was a guy called Paul Watkins, Brooks Poston, and Danny DiCarlo. The girls that were there did not want to talk to me. Squeaky Frommy and one or two others. They were silent. But the guys who were not involved in the murder sat down with me and told me a story that I thought was ridiculous, because I thought these people are suffering from the after effects of LSD or some delusionary drug, because within a 3-day period, they told me all about Manson, how he brainwashed the girls, and I don't want to get ahead of the story, and how he had such control over these young women, these runaways, and then they told me the story, which, because I traveled with the Beatles, I thought these guys are crazy about how Charlie Manson brainwashed the girls into believing that the Beatles were sending them secret messages in their helter-skelter White Album songs to say there was a race war coming and Charlie would escape the race war and the rivers of blood by going with the members of the family to a underground city in the desert, and so on and so forth. When they told me the story, I wasn't about to say, as any reporter, you're full of you know what, because that would have not been too clever.
Right.
So I listened with absolute disbelief as they told me the story, and they told it to me over a 3-day period, a long weekend on a Monday, finishing on a Monday, and I went away and thought, this is ridiculous.
But that was before, and again, I'm going back to the Epic series that I watched, and in the second episode of that series, which was, again, really, really riveting, the entire second episode dived into Charles Manson's childhood and the very, very difficult childhood that he had. His mother was a criminal. His mother was in prison for much of his young life, and he was raised and humiliated by his uncle and
yes.
sent to school in a dress and kind of constantly humiliated. And he was very small. He was not physically imposing. And so he kind of had to start developing this ability to manipulate. And do you think that it was, they definitely painted a picture in that second episode that a lot of what happened to him, he could have had a different path. You came to this fork in the road, and his mother's incarceration was that fork. And a lot of things could have happened one way or another. And unfortunately, he went the wrong path. And he'd been in prison prior to even being in prison for what you're talking about with the government vehicle. He'd been in prison 5-6 times, right? I mean, before that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, what I liked about the Oscar-winning filmmaker Leslie Chilcott, who's a very good documentary filmmaker, when I watched that episode that you just mentioned, and I knew a lot about Manson, I knew about his background, I must tell you that I started to feel some sympathy for him.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a forlorn guy whose mother, who was a 15-year-old woman who got knocked up by the first man she slept with.
Mm-hmm.
Manson never knew his father. His mother went to prison. The horrible, horrible childhood, bounced around from relative to relative, was unmanageable, was sent to reform school, was sexually attacked at reform school, spent his whole life going from one reform school to another reform school. And you think, my God, the poor guy really had a terrible childhood. I agree with that, but you tell me, wouldn't you concur that we know, and and a lot of people know, young people who've had terrible childhood, but they do not end up becoming maestros of mass murder?
100%. I agree with you 100%. When I watched that episode, I felt the same way you did. I felt genuine sympathy for his situation, for sure. He seemed to me to have an incredible need for acknowledgement and recognition and appreciation, and he tried to get that through a couple different ways. I mean, he definitely tried his hand at music, and he tried to be a musician and tried to gain some level of recognition that way, and that didn't work out. He had it seemed to me like he had several opportunities that if one thing had broken differently for him, he definitely might have gone a different path.
A different path.
But everybody's that way.
But Pete, as you said a little earlier, he was a small guy.
Yes.
He was in these reform schools. He was beaten up. He was threatened. And he suddenly, this was his school of hard knocks, or more than horrible knocks. And as a result, he learned to survive in this awful climate,
absolutely,
this awful situation. And in a way, this was his learning curve. And nobody wants that kind of awful learning curve. And then finally, when he got out, and I don't want to jump too far, when he got out, finally sent out from Terminal Island in California, where he'd gone for a variety of charges, he saw the world and thought, hey, this is the summer of love. This is San Francisco. This is Haight-Ashbury. This is sex, love, drugs, and rock and roll. And this was tailor-made, the 60s were tailor-made for Manson, who came out a con man, a survivalist, if you like, in his own strange way. And he suddenly, he'd learned how to succeed in business without really trying, or some of those self-help, Dale Carnegie books,
right.
I forget what they're called, you know the ones.
How to make friends and influence people. That's
right.
Yes.
And he took that book as his gospel, as how to manipulate people. And he was, I must say, he was a master manipulator.
No, absolutely. There's only so much. I get that you can drug and, I mean, there's a certain level that drugs will take you, but he had the ultimate control of how many people in that family, how many of these young women did he have control over? And they weren't just runaways, and they weren't just people who were, you had no other place to go. These are people who had jobs prior to meeting him and quit the jobs, or they were in relationships, they were married prior to meeting him and left those partners to be with him. There is some force of magnetism there. There's some force of personality there that, and even to that point, he found his way to true superstars. Dennis Wilson, he found his way somehow to Dennis Wilson, ends up living in his house, and ends up, playing music for him, ends up right there on the edge, right there on the verge, hobnobbing with musical producers and other artists, very close maybe to having his own works completed. There's something there. There was definitely something there that allowed him to control those people. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Have you ever had a chance to talk with him personally?
Well, no, I never talked with him personally. And I'll tell you why, because every time I saw him do an interview, or even when I saw him for a year, as I studied him, like sitting 20 feet away, saw the way he tried to manipulate people in court.
Yeah.
And a pretty girl came into the court, Charlie would turn around and give her the evil eye. He would kind of try and stare her out. So he was playing games. He was a game player. And with the girls, what happened was most of them were unhappy. Maybe they didn't like their mother. They disliked their father. Charlie had the ability to read them very quickly. Well, most of the scenario for each of the runaways was the same. Mum brutally treated me. Dad was an absentee, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And Charlie was able to hone in on that. There was a little girl, because she was 14 or 15 in the show, and I've seen her recently, Diane Lake, who was virtually turned over to Manson by her parents, which is pretty disgusting at 14, 15. And she was enchanted by Manson, and Manson would go to a young woman who came to him, and he would know she hated her father, she didn't get on with her mother, and he was able to, within 30 minutes, give them the impression that he said he was Jesus Christ, that he was what they were looking for. They wanted the meaning of life, and Charlie, in 30 minutes, served it to them, and they swallowed it whole.
That's amazing to me. If somebody walked up to me and said to me that they are Jesus Christ, I don't know that I would believe that. I wouldn't believe it would, definitely not within 30 minutes. And so, I mean, I get that you find a certain type of person, and once you find the first one of those, it probably gets easier and easier to pick out every other one that comes by. And you can see the people who maybe are more malleable mentally or ready or emotionally ready for that and need that father figure.
Well, for example, when Patricia Krenwinker, who was one of the girls involved in the murders and is in jail today, trying to get out on parole for the last 50 years, she was not a very pretty young woman who had terrible self-worth, self-image problems. Yes. Charlie immediately discovered this, and within, as I say, 30 minutes, he sweet-talked to her and said she was the most beautiful girl in the world. He made love to her, and she was a goner. That was
Wow.
it. That's all it took. So Manson was a great manipulator, and all the other things, other expressions you want to use, anyway. That's the way he operated.
How did he get in? I just mentioned Dennis Wilson. How did their relationship begin, and how long did it last?
Well, it was a very strange thing, but again, it was the passport with his girls to Dennis Wilson. So Dennis Wilson was driving down Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu, and he picked up two young women who it so happened were members of the Manson family, and he gave them a ride. And they said, we have a guru named Charlie, who's an ex-con. His father was a villain, but he's our rock. He's our pillar. And Dennis, not to be outdone, said, well, I know the Maharishi, and he's my pillar. So they got along well. And Dennis, who had an eye for young women, and unfortunately was a great musician, member of the Beach Boys, the drummer of the Beach Boys, as you know, said, hey, you guys, why don't you come along to my house and hang out? And that he was impressed with what the girls told him about Charlie. And so he dropped the girls at his mansion on Sunset Boulevard, beautiful old house that was owned once by the great humorist Will Rogers. Dennis was living there, and he dropped the girls off, said, I'm going to a recording session. I'll be back a little later on. About 6 hours later, he shows up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and he sees a bus in the driveway, and he walks into the house. And as he walks into the front door, who comes to the front door but Manson? And he looks at this kind of strange guy with a little beard and piercing eyes, and he's scared. And Manson sees that, and Manson goes down on his knees and kisses Dennis Wilson's feet. Dennis says, your house is my house, come in. I mean, he's already in the house.
Right.
Come in, bring the girls in. And from then on, he invites Manson and the girls to move into the house. It's you couldn't write the script. Who's going to do that? And they move in, they take advantage of Dennis, they take his clothing, his food, his money, and over a period of about 5 months, they ring up a bill of about $100,000 for penicillin, for gonorrhea, for the girls. But, and here's the but, Dennis now has an entourage of his own living in his house. He invites every person in the rock and roll world, the other Beach Boys, John Phillips and the Mamas and the Papas, Neil Young, to come to a party at Dennis Wilson's house. And who is the star entertainment? Charlie Manson playing the guitar, and these ladies of in various stages of undress, dancing attendants around Charlie. What a show!
Right.
You couldn't buy that ticket, could you? And that's what happens to Dennis.
How surreal is that? How surreal would that situation be for you? If you go to a party and there happens to be somebody there, and then ultimately that person ends up being, Charles Manson. Ultimately that happens.
Yes.
That's got to be just completely ridiculous.
It is, and of course, once the Manson name came up as a key prime suspect in the case, everybody that went to Dennis Wilson's party denied that they went to Dennis Wilson's party.
Absolutely.
But I tell you this: it wasn't Dennis Wilson adopted Manson and his girls, but Manson was very shrewd, and he thought, Dennis Wilson, drummer of the Beach Boys, I want to become a rock star. This guy is my passport to rock and roll.
Right.
And for a while it was.
I had also heard something, and you may or may not know this at all. I mean, Mike Love, who was one of the singers of the Beach Boys, he has his biography, and in his memoir, he claims that Dennis Wilson told him that Dennis had saw Manson kill a black man and dispose of him down a well. I mean, have you heard anything along those lines, or is that just some byproduct of Mike Love's feud with Dennis? I know they had quite a feud.
You know what I think it is? I think it's a story that sort of happened, but has been embellished. And I tell you what the story was, and this really happened. There was a stunt man called Donald Shorty Shea who lived at the Spahn Movie Ranch. Donald Shorty Shea married a black woman, a Las Vegas dancer, and took her back to the Spahn Ranch where Manson was living. Manson was not happy at this. And at the same time, they got into a fight, and I think Shorty Shea beat up Charlie Manson. After the murders of Sharon Tate and the La Biancas, Shorty Shea was grabbed by Manson and some members of his family, and they killed him. And they buried his body at the Spahn, in a remote area of the Spahn movie ranch. And years later, only years later, was Shorty Shea body dug up. So I think there is a little bit of embellishment. And I'm going to throw in one other little ingredient to the pot. What happened was there was a guy called Lotsa Popper, who was a drug dealer, and Lotsa Popper sold drugs to one of the members of the Charlie Manson gang, and the deal went bad, and Lotsa Popper threatened to come to the ranch and beat everybody up to get his money back for the drugs that he bought. Charlie Manson went to see him, and Charlie Manson shot him in the stomach. And Lotsa Popper, Bernard Crow was his name, Lotsa Popper played dead. And Charlie Manson thought he killed a member of the Black Panthers because Lotsa Popper was black. Mm-hmm. So the story went around like that, and Manson boasted about it. So I think what story you're telling me about Mike Love is a combination of Donald Shorty Shea being murdered and Charlie Manson actually shooting the black drug dealer in the stomach. And he survived, by the way. He testified at the trial. So there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you get a mixed sandwich, if you like. And so that's where I think Mr. Love came up with that story.
Is there any insight into what tipped Manson finally to murder? I know that he was always a criminal. He was always a grifter. He was always a manipulator, a car thief. But it didn't seem like he was a murderer until he got to California. What was the factors that led to that?
Well, here's my theory, and I think I heard it when I first wrote my book way back in 1970, Five to Die. And here's the story I heard, and I still believe it to this very day. Charlie Manson had sent a friend of his called Bobby Beausoleil. Sorry, have I lost you?
No.
Or I'm still here?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, so I can't see me, but as long as you've got me.
I can, yeah.
So Charlie Manson had sent Bobby Beausoleil to Gary Hinman, a musician in Topanga Canyon, in July of 1969 to get some money. Gary Hinman, who was a music teacher and made drugs on the side to make a few extra dollars, didn't have any money. Bobby Beausoleil killed him at the order of Charles Manson, and Bobby Beausoleil took the murdered man's car, drove 120 miles to San Luis Obispo, fell asleep in the car, and was arrested in the dead man's car. He was then charged with first-degree murder, which meant he faced the death penalty. I think, this is my theory, and a lot of people who know the case agree with me, I think what happened was Manson decided to do copycat type of murders, which was similar to the murder of Gary Hinman, with blood of the victim's blood painted on the walls of the house of the murder victim. Manson decided to copycat it so that the cops would be confused, and the cops would say Bobby Beausoleil, Manson's right-hand man, could not have killed Gary Hinman because here are two very similar murders, and the murder of Sharon Tate and the murder of the La Biancas. So it was a cover-up to put the police off the scent of Bobby Beausoleil. And Manson, like Bobby Beausoleil, who to this very day is still in jail for the murder of Gary Hinman, he liked Bobby Beausoleil, and he thought Bobby Beausoleil was loyal to him, loyal that he never mentioned Manson when he was arrested. So I think that was the cover. It's a horrible cover to kill two innocent families or two innocent sets of people just to cover up and make the cops think they got the wrong man. That's my opinion as to what actually happened and why the murders took place. It wasn't revenge on Terry Melcher, who we haven't talked about yet, but it was to get Bobby Beausoleil thrown out, released from prison.
Wow. So yeah, that is quite a thought process, right? So we'll kill 5 other people or 6 other people, however many there were, just to take you off the scent of one person.
Yes, it is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
So you mentioned Terry Melcher. How does he fit into the story?
Well, Terry Melcher was the son of the famous actress Doris Day.
Mm-hmm.
Terry Melcher was a successful record producer. He worked with the great group The Byrds, and he was a real hotshot in the music business. Terry Melcher, by chance, happened to live on the Cielo Drive house where he lived with Candice Bergen, a beautiful actress who was his girlfriend at the time. And he lived at the house, and then he'd moved out and rented. The house had been rented to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. And Charles Manson knew, of course, that Mr. Melcher had moved out of the house.
Okay.
So, cut a long story, he knew he'd left. And so the reason that there was some antagonism between Manson and Terry Melcher was this. Terry Melcher was enchanted by the Manson family, the girls and the rest of it. He went to the Spahn movie ranch and he auditioned Charlie Manson and said that he would hopefully, if he was good enough or whatever, give him a recording contract. Well, of course, he recorded them, and he wasn't too overwhelmed with Manson's musical skills, and he kind of tried to avoid Manson after he did the audition. Manson was very upset, and the feeling was that Manson, upset over the fact that he never got a recording contract from Terry Melcher, then sent his gang to seek revenge on Terry Melcher. However, and this is a big however, he knew Melcher had moved to Malibu to his mother's house. So that theory, if you like, that he sent them out to get revenge on Terry Melcher is not true. I think what I said a moment ago, that he did it to put the cops off the scent of Bobby Beausoleil, was more like the reason why the murders were carried out.
So once all of the suspects are arrested, how difficult was it to tie and to convict Charles Manson in this plot, since he didn't physically do the murders himself, since he wasn't actually physically there in terms of the killing? How difficult was it to I mean, he had a life sentence just like everybody who actually did the murders. Yes. How hard was that?
Well, it was very tricky, and they had a law in California that said if you can be convicted and there's enough evidence to prove that there was conspiracy and you were part of the conspiracy, you could be convicted. Okay. Because as you said, number one, Manson never went to the Sharon Tate murder house. And number two, Charlie Manson did go to the La Bianca's house 24 hours later. He went to the house, he went into the house while the killers waited in the car. He tied the La Biancas up. He went back to the car. He said to Tex Watson and Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinker, go into the house. You know what to do. He left. He sent them back to the house to carry out his dirty work. And then he drove away and told the killers to hitchhike back to the ranch. And the killers, of course, did their work and they did hitchhike back to the ranch. So strictly speaking, Manson did not participate in the actual murders, but the district attorney, the deputy district attorney, Vincent Bugliosi, realized that if he could prove to a jury that Manson was in charge of the conspiracy, he could get a conviction. And of course, he did get it. And what helped him, and I hope I'm not going too fast.
No, go ahead.
But when I covered the trial and I heard, my God, they're going to go on the Beatles made me do it lyrics thing, I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But of course it worked. But the important thing is that during the trial, which lasted almost a year, Manson was in charge of his girls. The jury could see how whenever he did something bizarre, like carving a swastika into his forehead or screaming at the judge or whatever, the girls under his spell did exactly the same. So in a way, Manson's bizarre behavior during the long trial worked against him because the jury could see that the girls did exactly what Manson, ordered them to do. And as a result, as I mentioned, and as the world knows, that Manson was convicted, as was the rest of the defendants.
Yeah, because to anybody who would listen, he would always make the statement that, I didn't do anything. I wasn't there. Tex Tex was actually the one who drove that process. And I mean, I'd actually even heard, and maybe I misheard, but I had actually even heard that he was concerned about Tex, who was much more physically imposing, much larger, much more physical man, potentially becoming more of an influence in the family than he was, and potentially taking some of that away from him. And so this was also kind of his way of reasserting his power and his dominance by making them go out and giving them the order to do these things, was just to hold on to what he had. But I don't know how you could ever believe anything he said, because every time he ever spoke, he spoke in riddles, he spoke in circular arguments. He never really said anything that you could pinpoint down as being factual. So it's hard to take anything he said as truth. But I don't know if you've heard that.
I mean, exactly what you just said. When you said to me, did I ever interview him? I saw all his interviews, and he did. He spoke in riddles.
Yeah.
He sang songs. He did, I guess you call it jiggery pokery and all sorts of strange things to avoid answering a straight question.
Right.
When people asked him a question, he would never answer in a normal fashion. And that's the way he was. Now, you mentioned Charles Tex Watson, who led the girls to the Sharon Tate house. And here's the thing. The outcome of the trial might have been different, but a lot of people don't know that when the trial began in July 1970, Charles Tex Watson was sitting in a Texas prison cell or jail cell in some degree of comfort, because his lawyer had battled extradition. And he battled extradition, and finally the district attorney in Los Angeles had to proceed with the trial without Tex Watson. And it is my belief that if Tex Watson had been extradited earlier, and Tex Watson had been on trial with Manson and the other girls, the three girls, the outcome might have been different, because Manson could have placed the blame on it all on Tex. Or even though Tex was obviously out of his drug mind when it happened, as were most of the girls. But if Tex Watson had been on trial, we just might have had a different outcome.
Because that is what he pushed. That is what Manson pushed for the rest of his life, was that, that Tex was the one who masterminded. Tex was the one who went and did it on his own. I didn't tell him that was necessary to do.
Exactly.
So when you were at the trial itself, so now we're in the trial, what kind of spectacle was that? That was obviously before I was born. What kind of spectacle was that around the country, especially in that California area? What kind of publicity did that get?
Well, you've got to realize two things. In that period, and the trial began in the summer of 1970, they had no cameras in the court, no television in the court, only artists and reporters. So it was a circus. I had covered many other trials, and this was the most bizarre I have ever encountered. It was bizarre because the girls came marching into the murder courtroom singing. Manson, as I said, carved a swastika. Outside the courtroom, the Manson devotees were kneeling outside the Hall of Justice saying, "We're waiting for Charlie to get free." It was ridiculous. It was crazy. And you never knew what was going to happen. One day, Manson got a sharp pencil and actually jumped at the judge and said, "You're going to die, old man." And the bailiff rugby tackled him and took him out the court, and he watched the rest of the day in a holding cell. And the other amazing thing was, when the defense got its chance to testify, they said, "Our clients do not wish to testify," which is not unusual in a murder case.
Right.
But not only, so they never put on any defense, which was insane. And the other little piece to this crazy jigsaw puzzle was most of the lawyers representing Manson were, and I'm going to say, were incompetent. One who was not incompetent was Paul Fitzgerald, who represented Patricia Krenwinker. The lawyer who represented Leslie Van Houten was a guy called Ronald Hughes, a very nice guy who'd never, ever handled any single case before, not even the traffic ticket. And then, of course, Manson got himself a guy called Irving Kinnerik, who was the most obstructionist lawyer I have ever seen in my life, and who in opening statement objected about 175 times and was found contempt of court by the judge because he wouldn't shut up. So not only did you have bizarre defendants, you had lawyers who were not quite up to snuff when it came to defending capital murder case candidates.
Were all these antics, were they an attempt to try to get an acquittal based on some mental infirmity, do you think? I mean, were these mock attacks on the judge and coming in, holding hands and singing, and was it purposeful trying to make that we have no sense of reality?
Well, I think part of the problem was, and I think I remember that when you did an interview with the Ted Bundy author, that Ted Bundy wanted to defend himself.
Yes.
Manson insisted that he was going to be his own lawyer. Well, it went on for about 2 months of back and forth, and the judge interviewed Manson and said, "Mr. Manson, you do not have the capabilities to defend yourself. You have to have a lawyer." So Charlie Manson was absolutely annoyed at that, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to get the worst lawyer on the face of the earth to represent me, and I'm going to turn this into whatever it should be, which is a circus." And so Manson, once he was not allowed to defend himself, decided he was going to turn the case into a screaming madhouse. And it was like, as I say, like nothing I have ever covered in covering many trials.
And you said that the district attorney, Vincent Bugliosi, he was the mastermind of the helter-skelter prosecution plan? Was that his brainchild?
Well, let me tell you, and again, this sounds very self-serving, Pete, but what happened was in 1970, before the trial began, my first book, Five to Die, came out. Mm-hmm. And in it, I spelled out in great detail the helter-skelter thing, the fact that the Manson believed the Beatles were telling him what to do, warning him of a revolution, all the rest of it. And in August of 1970, I sat in the courtroom, and suddenly I heard Vincent Bugliosi say, "Here's the reason for the murders," and he trotted out, "The Beatles made me do it" theory. I mean, I sat there perplexed, poleaxed, unable to believe that he was going to pursue this line of thinking. And he did. So many years later, Aaron Stovitz, who originally had been the chief district attorney and been thrown off the case for talking to the media, talking to Rolling Stone magazine before the trial, and sort of insulting, Susan Atkins when he called her behavior Sarah Bernhardt, who was a famous actress of a bygone era. He was thrown off the case, and Vince suddenly became the champion, the hero. But I must say, Vince Bugliosi lived, ate, and slept that case. He slept in the office. He was obsessed with it. And whatever you think of his skills, he got the prosecution to get organized, and he got the prosecution to get a conviction. So I've got to give it to Vince. He did very well on that, but he gave his life for this case. And it made him a hero and a champion and a best-selling author.
So his helter-skelter prosecution was saying that the messages in the Beatles' work were prophesying a race war, a coming race war. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. And Manson said it's in the Bible. There are men with breastplates, and what do you think the men with breastplates were? They're the Beatles with their guitars, and I mean,
oh wow,
cockamamie, ridiculous things like that, and yet most of the followers of Charles Manson swallowed it hook, line, and sinker, and they believed it. They actually believed it. Diane Lake, this young woman who was 14 at the time and survived the Manson family, was never involved in the murders, is now a grandmother And she told me not long ago that we believed what Charlie said. We believed it wholeheartedly.
Well, and that wasn't the last time that there was just an enormous furor over artists' lyrics and a perception of dual meanings in lyrics. I mean, there was that whole, when I was in the mid 80s, when I was a teenager, and that was coming up then with the heavy metal rock and roll and the the guys wearing makeup and Twisted Sister, and they were singing, and that was the devil's music, and the devil was making this music was making kids kill themselves, and it was kind of the same type of thing. They said the music made me do it. But if you're going to go, quite honestly, being a Beatles fan, it seems like you could go Happiness is a Warm Gun. You could use that one. You could use Revolution Number 9. That's kind of weird. If you wanted to say some secret messages were coming through, that's the one, right? I mean, isn't that all even recorded backwards?
Well, supposedly, but I mean, Helter Skelter, which was written by Paul McCartney, is about a funfair ride.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure. I mean, it is pulsating if you listen to the music, but if you look at the lyrics, there's nothing about a race war there.
Right.
And I want to tell you that because I knew the Beatles, I spoke to John Lennon years later, and he said, what's our songs and lyrics got to do with stabbing people to death? The Beatles were furious, upset, and angry that they should be dragged into this murder and be sort of blamed in this indirect way for this carnage. And they were very fit to be tied and angry.
So I read, I believe it was online, where you say that your book hopes to set the record straight on the Manson and give the truth to where there's some falsehoods and maybe some misinformation. What are some falsehoods or misinformation right now that's out there that's kind of generally accepted that actually isn't true? And I'll start you with one. I honestly thought, until I researched it much more recently, I actually thought that most of those family members who committed the murders were released. I was actually wrong. It was just the one, Squeaky Fromm.
I think it was Clem. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead with the. Yeah.
No. It was just that I thought that they had been released, and they haven't. They're actually all still, the people who committed the murders are still all in prison. There was one family member, I believe it was Squeaky Fromm, who got released in 2009 or something like that. And maybe I equated that to all of them had been released.
No. Okay, so let me just clarify that.
Yeah.
Squeaky Frommy was never accused of murder. What she did was, and she's still to this very day a devotee of Manson. She lives in anonymity in upstate New York at the moment. Squeaky Frommy was arrested because she tried to kill President Gerald Ford. Wow. I mean, that's kind of a serious case. And yet she has been released. She's free now.
Right.
Now, the other Manson family member, and I think it was Clem Grogan, was released. He wasn't involved in the murders of Sharon Tate or the La Biancas. Clem Grogan was involved in the murder of Donald Shorty Shea, the stuntman. And the reason they gave him salvation or release was that he gave the police the exact location of where Donald Shorty Shea was buried, and in return for that information, they let him out. He's now out. But as we talk today, everyone, Charles Tex Watson, Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinker, Bobby Beausoleil, are all in jail, and they all, from time to time, seek parole. And from time to time, the parole board says, yes, you can go out, providing the governor of California gives it his stamp of approval. And what happens? The governor of California says, no way are they going to get out. So that's where we stand now. And I must tell you that none of them are out except for the ones that you and I just talked about.
So there was a movie recently, and I think we talked about it just briefly the last time we talked, when we were talking about the Beatles, and we kind of touched on Manson then, called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right? And
yes.
It revolved around that Sharon Tate. It revolved around the Manson family were major characters in the movie. And like Quentin Tarantino does, he took a kernel of the truth, and then instead of it going left, he took it right, and then created his own truth on that. And not to anybody who may be out there who still hasn't seen that movie, not to ruin the ending, but I personally found that ending so satisfying, as horrible as it was. It was a horribly violent ending scene,
Yes.
but it was so satisfying to me. I found myself so happy that it was happening, because it
Yes.
was an alternate future and an alternate reality. I would just wanted to get your idea and your thoughts, having lived through that scenario. What were your? Have you seen that movie?
Yes, I've seen. Oh, yes, I've seen the movie, Pete. And here's the thing. It's interesting you say that you found it satisfying, and when before the movie came out, I saw that Sharon Tate's sister had approved the movie, and I thought, wow,
Yeah.
what? Is she really? I think it's Debbie Tate. It's a fairy story.
Right.
It's a fairy tale, and Once Upon a Time of Hollywood is that way. And I don't think, Pete, that we're going to spoil anybody's viewing of the film. It has a different ending to it, as you said.
Right.
And what I liked about it was not necessarily the ending, because I knew the ending, but three things. Number one, they captured the 1960s music scene in LA perfectly.
Yeah.
Number two, their recreation of the Spahn movie ranch was exactly how I remembered it. A kind of an eerie, spooky place with the girls there like Village of the Damned inhabitants. So that was that. And of course, the performances were pretty good. And generally speaking, the film was done very well. I think it got an Oscar for Brad Pitt, who played the stuntman. They changed the story around a little bit. And there was a guy, an actor playing Charles Manson, who, if you sneezed, you would have missed. Do you remember? Right. Remember that?
Yeah, no, I did actually think about that when you were talking about the Spahn Ranch, as you were talking about that. How was that? I mean, that had to be surreal to you, you say that it was recreated so well. Did it did it kind of bring back those memories of actually being there and seeing what it really looked like?
It did. It was, as I say, spooky, because the girls were kind of, not ethereal is the wrong word. That's too nice. Kind of a spooky, eerie, bizarre, kind of out of touch with reality. And that was the way I remember the girls there. That was the way they were. They would, I'd ask them about Manson, and he'd say, and Squeaky would say, oh, he is only interested in clean water and clean air. I mean, come on. We've got horrible murders. Get real. So you got the feeling in Quentin Tarantino's film that he captured the mood, the atmosphere, the music, and everything so well.
Man, that scene when Brad Pitt was there, it was so tense. I mean, that entire scene, I just was positive something terrible was going to happen that entire time. It was, because to your point, they looked so disconnected, and they were just kind of there in the background, and they're just staring at you, and it's like, it was such a good scene. The movie was great. If anybody out there who hasn't seen it, I would recommend it. But just because it went around with the subject of what we were talking about tonight, I wanted to touch on it with you. With just a couple more minutes here, and I did want to ask you, why does Charles Manson and the story of the Charles Manson and the family, why does it endure? I mean, even now that he's been dead for a couple of years, his legend is as big now as it ever was.
Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of young people don't know about Charles Manson. When I saw the film in my hometown cinema, I walked out, and as I walked out, a young woman of maybe 25, 26 turned to her boyfriend or her husband and said, where is Sharon Tate now? What is she doing?
No.
Is she making movies? And she believed the ending that she saw was the true ending. So you're absolutely right. There are a generation of people today who don't know much about Manson. Why the fascination? Well, of course, there's continued documentaries. There has been a lot of documentaries. People like me write books. There's always a new book around. And in general, people are fascinated, and I use the term loosely, with mass murderers. Why? What were the questions that you just asked me? Why did these young men and women who had everything to look forward to in life attach themselves to this puppet master to this monster. Why? And you want to know why. And you also, many people who are interested in true crime, as we talked about a few minutes ago, was the fact that you want to get into the mind of a monster. And the other thing was that when Manson was able to do interviews with television personalities, and he really milked that. He never became a rock star, did he?
Right.
But he became a TV star. He was with Diane Sawyer and Tom Snyder and Ron Reagan Jr. And he was playing the monster for them on television, prime time. And the other thing I like to say is that we enjoyed watching Manson manipulate the audience. We loved it because we knew the monster could come into our television living room, but we were safe because he was behind bars, even though he was in our living room on the box. So the fascination continues with the mind and the mentality of killers, and Manson keeps going.
Well, you mentioned that he was not able to become a rock star, but in a lot of ways, his legend, he is more famous than Dennis Wilson. He's more famous than a lot of those rock stars that he did meet at the time. I think if most people today saw John Phillips and saw Charles Manson, they would know Charles Manson. If they saw Dennis Wilson and Charles Manson,
yes,
they would know Charles
right.
Manson.
If you said, okay, folks, I'm going to give you Dennis Wilson, I'm going to give you John Phillips, and I'm going to give you Charles Manson. Who do you know?
That's right. They could show them every picture of every Beach Boy, and none of them would know it. None of right. Charles Manson would be more popular than them all. So ultimately, again, I kind of go back to, he seemed to me like, even as a grown man, he was still a little boy who needed that acknowledgement, who needed that recognition, who needed maybe what he didn't have from his mother, who was in prison, and from his uncle, who he was a disappointment to. You know, and it does lend a lot to the whole idea of that nature-nurture discussion. You know, was he born that way, or was he created that way and made that way through the situations that he encountered? It's an interesting, and I think that's why people are so interested in true crime. Ted Bundy, why did he become that way? You know, Ed Kemper, why did he become that way? What caused it? And I think Charles Manson falls right into that narrative. But I think he ultimately achieved his goal. He's more famous than most of the rock stars of his era, outside of maybe a handful. You know, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix maybe, but most of the people in that era, you know, if I said England Dan and John Ford Cooley or Charles Manson, it's going to be Charles Manson. So
yes, but don't forget, he's more famous not for his music but for his murder.
Wrong reasons. That's right, wrong reasons. But isn't it the old newspaper thing? You know, the fame. No news is bad news, right? Isn't that what it is? No press is bad press. Any press you're getting is your fame.
That's true. That's the old. Yeah, that's the old.
That's right.
Hollywood adage. Yeah, exactly. I don't care what you say about me as long as you spell my name right.
As long as you're still thinking of me. It doesn't matter if you're talking badly. You're talking about me. That's what's important. I think that's the motto he lived by the rest of his life was, you are still talking about me.
Yes.
We're right here at the hour. I thank you so much again for coming in. It seems like I could probably go on and on and on about this. Are there anything else that you're working on? I know that on your book, on your ivordavisbooks.com, all of your books are there, you know, On Tour with the Beatles and Meet the Penguins, right? Meet the Penguins. We talked about that last time.
Yes, we did.
Children's book.
We did. And for a change of pace, what I did was I wrote a children's book, which is kind of fun, and it's kind of a spoof of the Beatles as penguins. And I had a lot of fun with that. And then after I had a lot of fun with the children's book, I jumped back into the murder morass of Manson.
Have you ever, or I mean, you might have something in the works, so you might have already done it. I didn't see it. Have you ever entertained the idea of maybe a book on RFK? I know you were there when on the night he was assassinated, or any of those other situations you covered.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that, because somebody else mentioned that. I think because I only traveled with Bobby Kennedy for about a month or less, and was unfortunate to be in the Ambassador Hotel the night he was murdered. But what I might do is do a book about a sort of short chapter book about Bobby Kennedy and other interesting stories and personalities that I've covered in my career, a kind of melange of Hollywood and politics and stuff like that. So that I'm definitely working along those lines. And so stay tuned.
Well, I think that you were, Ivor, I think that you were in the sweet spot. I think that you could write a book where every chapter was 1 year of the decade of the 60s. You go from 1960 to 1970, and each chapter is 1 decade of your life in that time frame. And you could talk about Martin Luther King assassination, the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, the moon landing, on tour with the Beatles, Charles Manson. It's an amazing amount of history that happened within a 10-year period.
Well, I must tell you, you've sorry to interrupt you, but what you've done is give me an idea, because you mentioned the John Kennedy assassination, which I didn't cover, but about 2 years later, I got a call and they said, Jim Garrison, the district attorney in New Orleans, has solved the Kennedy murders. Get down and talk to him. So I raced down to New Orleans, and Jim Garrison is going to tell me who killed Kennedy. And when I get there, he gives me a lot of blether, and he keeps saying, you came all the way from England just to talk to me?
Yeah.
So I said, Mr. Garrison, tell me what I've come here for. And of course, he gives me a lot of old stuff, and I think most of you know that he didn't solve the Kennedy assassination. But it's a funny scene with me racing down to find the truth about Kennedy and getting a lot of blether from Jim Garrison. So every time we talk, you trigger other thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I just think that, to your point, we're getting farther and farther away from real history and real truth. And just the way that the world is right now, I don't know that a lot of young people want to know the real history and want to know the real truth. And to have somebody who was able to live through it and live through that period of time, I mean, before I was born, right? And to be able to say, I watched this movie that was made in 2019, and essentially it transported me right back to where it was on that, the Spahn Ranch at that time frame, and it was so realistic and so right. That's not an experience I would ever be able to have. So to me, individuals who were there at the time, who can put those thoughts on paper, who could bring that history back to life, are invaluable. That's just my opinion of it, because I think we're losing that, and before you know it, that's all going to be lost to me. So if you have the time and the energy to do it, go for it. I think it'd be great.
Well, thank you so much. And when the book comes out along those lines, I will give you absolute credit, because
I appreciate it.
You re-triggered my mind in that direction. And as I say, before I become old and infirmed, and who is it again I'm speaking to? Before it goes, and it will go, I'm sure, at some stage, and I'm part of what they call in the coronavirus era, elderly. I'm not sure what that means, but that's me anyway. But thank you so much for that encouragement and for that advice. And it has been a pleasure talking to you again. Thank you.
As always, yeah, for sure, Ivor. And once again, that's ivordavisbooks.com. You can also find him on amazon.com. You can also find him in a starring role in the Epix documentary, Helter Skelter. Hopefully you have a better subscription than I do. I was able to watch 2 episodes, and then they locked me out and told me I had to get some upgraded thing. But if and when I can watch it, I definitely will, because, like I said, the first 2 episodes were fabulous, incredibly interesting. It is something that people need to know, for sure. You need to learn that kind of history. So once again, thank you, Mr. Ivor Davis. I appreciate you joining me again tonight. And stay well, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, and you stay well as well.
I will. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So once again, that's Mr. Ivor Davis. Made a return trip to the Prove Me Wrong podcast. We talked about Charles Manson, the Charles Manson murders. We didn't get, man, it's such an in-depth topic that we could discuss it for 2 hours. We could have made it a 2-parter and really dived in deep to the rationale, the time frame, how it was living in that family on the Spahn Ranch, that nomadic lifestyle. How did he recruit these people? Where did he find these people? These are all questions to me that are fascinating. It is fascinating to me that someone can manipulate someone else to the point, maybe one person, but when you have 20 people of all different backgrounds, all different experience levels, different ages, different circumstances, men and women, bringing them all in. So all of those individuals, those cult of personalities, the Jim Jones of the world, the Charles Mansons of the world, the David Koreshes necessarily of the world, the people who are able to connect on some level with individuals who can find out exactly what it is that they need at that moment, can give it to them, and then can gain their loyalty and their allegiance to the fact that they will, to the point they will kill for you. They will kill someone because you asked them to. No real reason to kill those people. There was no reason that Sharon Tate had to die. There was no reason that the La Biancas had to die. There was no reason that any of those people had to be murdered in the way they were, other than Charles Manson asked for it. That is a supreme amount of power. I don't know. And that is something that it fascinates people. That's why true crime has its genre. What is going on in their minds? How does it tick? What were the factors that brought them to that point? Was it his childhood? Was it the fact that he, again, was small, was bullied, was assaulted, did not have a stable home life, did not have a stable father figure, a stable mother figure, had to see his mother in prison, had to go to the prison to visit her. So many things, so many points along the road, that where you could either make the right turn or the wrong turn and you can be lost. Life is random in a lot of ways, and you don't know which decision along the path is going to lead you in a direction that is unrecoverable. Some decisions you make, you can realize that it's bad and you can take a left turn somewhere and get yourself back on course. And some lead you over a cliff, and that's it. And you've got nothing left. And somewhere along the line, Charles Manson took a left turn that led him off a cliff, and he took himself and all of his family with him. So, as always, Ivor is a great guest. I really like that guy. I would love to have him come on and talk to me again. So full of energy, and he is full of experience and knowledge. And those things are all, those are being lost now. We're at a point now where history is right on the edge of being rewritten and being lost. And so anybody like Ivor who has lived through it and who knows it and who's coming at it with a clean eye and a clean lens, those people are invaluable. So what do you think about it? What do you think about Charles Manson? What did you know about Charles Manson up to this point? It has been 50 years since those murders occurred and since he was found guilty along with his family of committing the crime. You can drop us a line, provemewrongcast@gmail.com. That's our email address. You can also contact us through Facebook or Instagram. Just the name of the show is Prove Me Wrong. Look us up. You can find us. If you are looking for the podcast itself, you can find us on Anchor, SoundCloud, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, any podcast app, iTunes, any place where you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the page, and you will be notified when a brand new episode releases. We typically release one every week. So every week you will have a new conversation like this one waiting for you to listen to. Hopefully it's as interesting as this one is. We kind of go all over the spectrum, things that interest me or things we talk about, period. So if you have any feedback, contact me one of those ways. We're also on YouTube, as you can see here with this little YouTube scroll. We're at the bottom of the page here. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you'll be notified when a new YouTube program has been released. Once again, you'll be the first on your block to know. You can go onto YouTube and watch me talk to my guests live and in person. I think it's more fun. Quite honestly, it's more fun to watch us, a little more interesting to watch us than it is to listen to the podcast. But if you're working and you need, you're cleaning, you want to hear some mindless discussion, podcast is the way to go. Before we go tonight, this episode of the Prove Me Wrong podcast has been brought to you by Java Remix. Java Remix is the perfect blend of 100% organic Arabica coffee infused with nano-emulsified CBD. You can start your day off on the right foot with a great tasting cup of coffee with all the demonstrated benefits of pure CBD. Java Remix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-Cups in both regular and decaf. And if you aren't a coffee person, Java Remix also offers CBD-infused teas and even beauty products like bath bombs and body scrubs. As an added benefit for our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, javaremix.com, and enter the promo code Prove Me Wrong, you'll receive 20% discount off of your entire shopping experience. Java Remix also offers free shipping on all orders over $40, so you have no reason not to give it a shot. Once again, that is javaremix.com, promo code Prove Me Wrong. The Prove Me Wrong podcast is brought to you tonight by ZendoZones citronella burners from JT Eaton. They're shaped like fearless bug repellent tiki gods. So go ahead and let Surfin' Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones. They're perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. You can find them on Amazon.com and at select Ace Hardware retailers. So go ahead and collect them all today. So once again, from my guest, Mr. Ivor Davis, IvorDavisBooks.com, I am Pete Lieb. This is the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we will talk to you again soon.